Hey everyone, I'm Chris Lesniak,
And I'm Rob Byer, and this is
the Debate Math Podcast.
Debating Mathy topics and Mathy pedagogy with mathy people just like you.
Let's get into this month's debate.
Well, hello and welcome back to our summer hot seat series. Today we want to hear about the role of math in students' educational and career journeys.
Mathematics has often been considered a gateway to opportunity, but some people argue that it's too often. It acts as a gatekeeper instead.
Well, is it really a barrier for our students' future successes? And how much of a problem is this? We're going to dive in deep to this today with our hot seat resolution, Math is a Gatekeeper.
Our hot seat guest today is an expert on college access, readiness, and success. She's a former journalist who has covered not only education, but also immigration, law enforcement, and Asian affairs. She spent 7 years as a staff writer for the San Francisco Chronicle, receiving numerous awards, including the Livingston Award for Young Journalists. She also served as a program officer in education at the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. She earned a bachelor's degree originally from Youngstown, Ohio, and she earned a BA at Princeton University and a master's in business and Asian studies from the University of California, Berkeley. Fun fact, she also speaks Mandarin. It's Pamela Burdman. Hi, Pam.
Hi there. Nice to see you both.
Can you tell our listeners where you are and what your current role is?
I am the executive director of Just Equations, and I'm coming to you from Just Equations' offices in downtown Oakland. Just Equations, for people who don't know, is a policy institute our focus is on the role of math in education equity. So I'm right on your topic.
Yeah, sounds like it. And now the question we ask all of our guests, when did math first become controversial to you?
So I can remember this well because I was working for the Hewlett Foundation and doing grant making related to community college student success. And we funded several projects to improve success of students in community colleges who had been placed into remedial math and English. But the research really popped out on math because it revealed the extent to which math was a barrier and also how much there was math misalignment in community colleges. So there were math expectations for college that weren't necessarily clear. They weren't necessarily well aligned with high school. And up to 90% of students were having to take remedial courses, sometimes multiple remedial courses, often in algebra, and few of them ended up completing their math requirement or earning a degree. Many of these students were being required to repeat high school algebra courses that they may have already passed, even if their majors might have benefited from other math preparations, such as statistics or quantitative reasoning. After leaving Hewlett, I wrote a policy brief on this issue back in 2013, and that one policy brief raised so many policy issues about math with respect to college preparation and success, and high school math, college admissions, etc., that I continue to work on this topic today, 12 years later. I started Just Equations in 2018 to focus on this. And I want to point out, I'm not a math specialist. I do not have a math degree. I haven't been a math teacher, but I think math is important. I saw a need for an independent voice looking at mathematics and advocating for students, given that other organizations focusing on math education were composed of mathematicians, math educators, or they were promoting a specific product, a specific solution. And at Just Equations, our goal is to promote equitable education outcomes while ensuring that math plays a positive role in achieving them. So hope that gives you a sense of how I got here on this journey.
Very good. Thank you so much. And with that, let's get into the debate. We begin with an opening statement from our guest. Pam, you have 2 minutes to share your arguments, and your time begins now.
Okay, well, thank you. I want to say that math learning is important, and using math as a gatekeeper can actually undermine the purpose of math learning. I like one of the definitions from NCTM, National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, on the purpose of math education, which is to help students do 3 things: expand professional opportunity, understand and critique the world, and experience wonder, joy, and beauty. But sadly, many students are receiving none of these three benefits, or maybe one of them. And these opportunities are just distributed in highly inequitable ways, which we see as a social justice issue. Just for one example, consider that factors known at birth are highly predictive of whether a student will ever take calculus. In 2019, 46% of Asian American high school grads had completed calculus, compared to just 6% of Black high school grads. And we know from a survey we conducted that 89% of college admissions officers say that taking high school calculus means a student is likely to succeed in college. Whether or not you agree with that, this does have an impact on students' opportunity, a big impact. And then, as I also mentioned earlier, at the other end of the college spectrum, we are seeing lots of students attending less selective institutions relegated to lengthy sequences of remedial algebra courses that might delay or defer their ability to progress in their majors. So with all of this emphasis on calculus and algebra as gatekeepers, our math education is often downplaying the importance of other mathematical areas such as statistics, probability, discrete math, which are also increasingly important as a foundation for students in a range of STEM as well as non-STEM pursuits. So we think that algebra and calculus have an important role in the math curriculum. We are in no way against them, but we're against their use as gatekeepers that can come at the expense of math learning. And we think at Just Equations, we need to widen our perspective on math education, particularly high school math, to incorporate really a broader perspective and a broader range of topics, so students can be prepared to succeed in college, in their careers, and as citizens.
Wow. This is why I love Just Equations so much. All right. So,
thanks.
My first question. So you talked a lot about like the role of algebra and calc, that it has a place, but not as a gatekeeper. So,
Right.
What is the role of math education? What is that role? How does it play into a kid's trajectory to where they're headed after high school? Because I know in your blog post you mentioned a couple of different things, but what's the role of math ed?
Well, we think math ed, and one of the things I did in some earlier work is I looked at, because colleges require math as a graduation requirement. Almost every college does, right? And then the question is, what is the origin of this and why do they require math? What I found out was, going back about 50 years, there was a survey of college math chairs, and only 10% of them said that every student should take math in order to graduate from college. And now we're over 90%. So I was like, wow, why has this changed so much? And I think it's because initially there was a narrow view of mathematics as almost this sequence of math that prepares people to be rocket scientists or prepares people to be mathematicians. But as our world has changed, it's become more and more clear that everyone needs to know math, but they don't necessarily need to know the math you need to be a rocket scientist. So I think when we look at college statements, I haven't looked at high school, but I think it would be similar. When we look at college statements on why students have to have a math requirement, it's often not called math. It's often called quantitative reasoning. And I think that's what we want. We want people to be able to reason quantitatively in their lives and in the whatever domains in which they're working. And yet somehow math education is sometimes treated as this abstract thing that's disconnected from other things we care about and we want to learn about. And I think it's a big mistake, because it's pretty hard to learn math that way when it doesn't mean anything and when it's not about anything and when it's disconnected from that purpose. I don't know if folks listening will have seen the film Count It Out, but there's a great section in there when Karim Ani is talking about a word problem I think it's an algebra problem, that you're looking at how long does it take for somebody to drink a milkshake, and then you calculate the rate at which the person is drinking the milkshake. And he points out that he doesn't think this is a great problem because you're not learning that much math, and you're also not learning anything about milkshakes. I would like to see us learning math in a way that we're not just learning the calculations, but we're learning about something such as a milkshake, such as education, such as the environment, pollution, anything. I just think learning math in those contexts for the majority of students is going to make a huge difference. And that's also because that's the reason we're teaching math. We're teaching math so that we can use it in our lives, in our careers.
Let me back up a little bit more on this idea of college. A few seasons ago, we had a debate about the role of calculus in college admissions, and we had a admissions director from The Ohio State University on, and she shared that there's some kind of research out there that says that students who have taken higher level math courses and have high math grades are shown to succeed in college and persevere for the 4 years, and so she thinks math is a real key element in determining students' placement. So how do you reconcile that idea with math being, you want it to be less of a gatekeeper for students?
Right. So when we say less of a gatekeeper, we're not saying that students shouldn't be learning math, but less emphasis on using math to sort and rank students. So math is definitely important. I did watch that episode. I don't remember the specific claim, but I do think some of the research on math education as sort of a predictor of future outcomes is often conflates causation with correlation, because we know that colleges also select and also select for students who've had certain types of math. And so we know, because it's used as a gatekeeper, then students with certain kind of math backgrounds might appear to be more successful and might be actually more successful of mathematics. And that's what one of my prior blog posts got into. So I think there is some valid research on this question, but when we started working on statistics pathways, for example, there were all these claims that, but there's this data on algebra, but nobody had studied. But what about students who take statistics? And is there any reason to think they won't do well? And now there is some research from the Fordham Institute that has helped to show that, at least for students who aren't pursuing STEM majors, students who take statistics do just as well as students who've taken calculus. And we saw some similar research on that from the University of Illinois, looking at their first-year students. So I think the more research we have on this, the more questions we may have about those longstanding assumptions that we've had.
And so I guess to follow up with that, so I'm imagining some people out there listening to this are thinking, okay, so we, are going to be less rigorous in math or make it, all touchy-feely in math so that everyone succeeds. Is that kind of what you're saying? Or what do you envision of math? Is to still maintain a rigor?
Right. I'm glad that you asked that question, because I think, and I did a blog about rigor too, that I'm happy to share with folks later. But there are a lot of different ways to think about rigor. And I don't think that just making math hard and making things difficult is the best definition of rigor. And yes, it is true, sometimes people use math as a measure of, can students do hard things, as Akil Bello likes to say. And there is some validity to that, but rigor is much more expansive than just doing hard things. And I guess I would say, when we look at, for example, the Common Core math practices, there's a lot more in there than just that traditional notion of rigor, and which also suggests being boring and turgid and all these kinds of things that could easily turn students off. What I'm suggesting is there can be quite a lot of rigor in using mathematics to analyze actual social problems and issues. Or we were talking earlier before this episode about basketball. I mean, I'm a basketball fan. There's lots of math and lots of statistics that goes into what's happening in a basketball game in terms of different players' statistical records. Their percentages of free throw, the free throw percentages and all sorts of. There's lots of meaningful ways in which we can use mathematics that engages many, many more students. I will say I was a student who took to math. I'm not a math major or anything, but I did pretty well in math, and it wasn't that difficult for me. But the challenge of teaching math is to teach it for all the students for whom it's not coming naturally, not the students who might be able to learn it, with relatively little instruction. So I hope I answered that question, but please push me again if I didn't get to the whole question.
So I want to think more about this idea of math as a gatekeeper from like a social standpoint. Thinking about the social aspects, the social belonging within math class, and then maybe even specifically thinking about like students who are 6th, 7th, and 8th grade taking Algebra 1. Like, how does that contribute to this idea of math as a gatekeeper? And like, what can we do about this?
So what can we do about, I want to make sure I understood your question.
The social constructs of
the social construct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that is a hard one because we know, I think you both know, and many of your listeners know, that it starts pretty early on where students see themselves as kind of insiders or outsiders to math, right? And I do think I'm not, I will say, an expert in instruction, but I have seen that there are instructional approaches that are much more inclusive, that recognize students' valid thinking around math concepts and not just focusing on right and wrong answers. And we have to be careful when we say this because I am not suggesting that it doesn't matter if a student gets a correct answer or not. I'm suggesting that overemphasizing that in a classroom setting can contribute to students feeling like outsiders in their math classroom. And we know that is really very common. The other thing that really astounds me when I go back and read it, there was this, and again, this is an example from college, but it would certainly apply to younger students as well. There was a major study of success in college calculus, and with tens of thousands of students, I think. And what they found was the biggest predictor of good instruction for calculus were things like the instructor knows who I am and the instructor cares about my learning. And those are things that we should be doing all throughout, our class time. And the students who have trouble answering a math question and aren't raising their hands, we need to have ways that they get to participate in mathematics just as much as other students in the class. And I think, there are certainly examples of classrooms that do that with small groups and projects and other ways. And we're a policy institute, and we don't have expertise in instruction per se. We certainly support all of that and think it's super important.
I'm wondering, what do you say to teachers who are in this bind because they have all these state standards they have to cover and the state exams coming up, and you're advocating for, let's focus on stats and probability and things that may actually be more interesting or useful for their future or the beauty wonder. So how do teachers deal with this information when they have so many external pressures at the moment?
Well, that's a very good question. And what I would say to teachers, but I guess I would also say a lot of teachers agree with this. I was just at a meeting with the California Math Council yesterday, and there's a lot of interest among teachers in this. And I feel for teachers because many teachers would like these changes and yet are dealing with exactly what you said, the math standards and curriculum as it exists. So I think that, for one thing, we are trying to advocate for shifts in some of that. I also think, as I mentioned earlier, there's room within even the traditional standard, whatever you want to call it, algebraic math instruction, to teach in more student-centered, inquiry-based ways that engage students further. And there are certainly resources out there. I'm not promoting any specific products, but there are certainly resources out there that can help teachers with that. But I'd also encourage teachers who support some changes in math offerings to lend their voices to that, because I think the folks making these decisions need to hear from teachers. And we've just, especially with the high school data science courses, we've just heard so many teachers waxing eloquently about how it's like turning on a light bulb for their students who might have been lost to mathematics and suddenly discover from a data science course that they actually like math and want to do more of it and want to do more algebra or pre-calculus or something. And I would say that's a win for the traditional stuff as well.
The last one for me, Pam, is as educators, whether it's, I used to be an executive director for K-12 math, science, and STEM in a very large district in Pennsylvania. From us at the central office level to like teachers and everywhere in between, even, community members, how are we able to, or how can we influence policy to help kind of shift this narrative and change this narrative to try to not have math as a quote unquote gatekeeper or a social barrier, social status barrier, so to speak? Like, how can we influence policy?
So another great question. I would say it varies so much in terms of where you're located, but certainly most districts have math coordinators, sometimes county offices that do professional development, and most have state math coordinators, and most states have a branch of the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. TODOS is another organization that definitely works on advocating for more equitable mathematics. There are a range of groups that work on that. Certainly, we'd welcome people to engage with Just Equations, come to our national conference. And I think with policy change, it always depends on timing. There are times when decisions are being made, and there are times in between. But the times in between are always a time for folks who are interested in change to align with each other, to meet, to figure out their strategies, figure out their asks. So when there is a chance to make requests of policymakers, that's often referred to as a policy window, they are primed and ready to speak up. And I think teachers are really important voices in this whole conversation. And yesterday I was with, like I said, math educators in California, actually at the Capitol in Sacramento, speaking with legislators about the importance, in this case, of things like funding for math coaches. And the legislative staff were, I think, very receptive and very impressed that a group of, a few hundred math educators representing thousands of math educators around the state took the time to step up. And they're often looking for people who can help them with, who have expertise in things like education.
All right, so that concludes our questioning round, and we'll now give Pam a few minutes to make her final arguments to you. Pam, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. Well, Just Equations produced a report recently. It was focused on community college students, but what we found was that of all community college students, only 2% ultimately earn a bachelor's degree in STEM within 6 years. And we think that path is just unacceptably narrow at a time when we really should be widening the path to STEM. And we know that math hurdles are contributing to narrowing those opportunities. And we also think students' experiences need to be less narrow and more broad. Too many students' math experiences involve highly procedural and decontextualized instruction that just fails to engage them deeply in mathematics. And I want to be clear, and you asked about this earlier, I am not suggesting that procedures and computational accuracy don't matter. Of course, students need to learn to calculate with precision. But as I was saying, if you look at the Common Core math practices, precision is just one of the 8. We can't focus myopically on precision while ignoring other skills like sense-making, reasoning, constructing arguments, and modeling with mathematics. And I mentioned I'm not a mathematician. I am a writer, and I know that good writing requires accurate spelling and grammar, and I'm a stickler for accurate spelling and grammar. But mastery of spelling and grammar does not make someone a good writer, and I also can't imagine it would motivate a student to become a writer if all they were learning was spelling and grammar. So likewise, performing mathematical procedures is important, but it's not enough to ensure that students can reason and think mathematically. And myopically focusing on that is really not a recipe to engage students and have them become people who love to do math. It's more a recipe for turning students off from engaging in math or pursuing STEM fields. So as I said earlier, I'm not a mathematician, but if I were, that's not how I would want my discipline to be used. I would not want it to be used for the purpose of ranking and sorting students. I would really want it to be used to help make students' lives better and to improve the world we live in.
Thank you so much. And that concludes this hot seat debate. I think you've given educators out there a lot of food for thought today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes.
It's been fun.
Thanks for being on. It's up to our listeners to take a moment and ponder this hot seat discussion. Share with your friends. And we would love to hear from you on this because I think this is a conversation worth being had. Be sure to follow us on Blue Sky at Debate Math to share your thoughts on this debate. What stood out to you?
And again, huge thanks to our guest, Pam, for being here and sharing all of your thoughts and leading into a little bit of a controversy here.
And thanks to all of those who are listening, and we hope you enjoyed and learned from this.
And so as we wrap up, Pam, where can listeners find you and learn more about Just Equations?
So Just Equations is on social media. We're mostly on LinkedIn, Instagram, and newly on Blue Sky. Our website is justequations.org. And if you're interested in our monthly blog and newsletter, you can join our mailing list on our website.
Wonderful. Thank you all.
Want to learn more about incorporating debate activities into your math classroom? Go to luzniak.com/podcast to sign up for my mailing list and get your first set of example debate activities you could use with your students today. Go to luzniak.com/podcast.
Don't forget to reach out to us with comments and questions on debatemath.com or follow us on Twitter at DebateMathPod and follow along with #DebateMathPod.
Rate us and review us on Apple Podcasts.
Or wherever you listen to this podcast. Your feedback is super important to us.
Well, that's all from us.
Looking forward to debating with you more next episode. Until next time, cheers.